Good morning, Stronger Than You Think community. Welcome to the Stronger Than You Think podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Verhoff. Remember, you are walking with me. So if this is your first time tuning into this podcast, you may notice it's a little bit different. The sound quality isn't in a studio. It is a mic from my head. If you're watching the YouTube version, you can see me. If you're not, if you're just listening on iTunes, or if you're listening on like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or just listening on YouTube, you're not going to see me. That's what's happening. You'll hear cars, you'll hear birds, sometimes woodpeckers, sometimes hawks. Sometimes you'll hear me say hello to friends and neighbors as they pass by, because we're walking together on my morning walk. That is where I have my best inspiration, my best messages, my best ability to share with you the things I'd like to share with you. And I wanted to share something. Yesterday was on a call with a client, and she said she'd heard my podcast about asking for what you want and for what you need. And she posed this question to me. She says, Sarah, what if I ask for what I need and the person is unable to give it to me? I thought that was a fantastic question, because that could be real, couldn't it? Sometimes people can't give us what we want. Now, in this case, I asked her a couple of questions. One of them was, well, have you told him what you want? And have you told him what you need? Her response was, well, no. We've been together for this many years. He should just know. He should just be aware. And so then we both giggled. And I helped her to understand that if we don't say what we need, people can't know. So for example, if I say, I need help, and I put it in your hands, all of a sudden, you, my friend, my listener, my colleague, may send me flowers. You may show up and pick something up off the ground. You may offer to do my dishes. You may give me a book. You may give me a hug. And isn't that fascinating? Because none of them are wrong, but perhaps none of them are what I meant. So if I am very vague, if I say, I need help, I need more affection, I need you to step up, the other person has all the freedom and interpretation in the world. So if they don't give you what you want, it's because you didn't say specifically what you want or what you need. Isn't that a fascinating thought? So let me tell you a little story. It's the parable of the hammer, one of my favorites. And it's possible that I've shared it before. Probably the first time I'm sharing it on my podcast. One of my very favorites. So it comes from a book called El Arte de Amargarse la Vida. The Art of Making Your Own Life Miserable. It's a gentleman sitting on the front cover. Well, I mean, front cover is a gentleman sitting down at a table, and he's got a bird cage on his head. And he's frustrated because he's got a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or hot chocolate in front of him, and he can't get it to his mouth because he's got this bird cage on his head. Well, all you have to do is take the dang bird cage off. But instead he sits there and is miserable. So along comes the story, parable of the hammer. Once upon a time, there was a man, and he was wanting to hang pictures on his wall. And so he started taking pictures on his wall, and he realized that he needed a hammer. So he thought, I'm going to go next door and ask my neighbor if I can borrow his hammer. So he opens the door, he starts walking out, and he's having happy thoughts of, I've let my neighbor borrow this, and I've let my neighbor borrow this, and of course he would let me borrow his hammer. And then the thought occurred to him, well, what if he doesn't let me borrow his hammer? Well, why wouldn't he let me borrow his hammer? I've let him borrow this thing and this thing. He borrowed my lawnmower, I went over and I helped him with this. That's rude. Why wouldn't he let me borrow his hammer? What kind of a neighbor doesn't let a neighbor borrow their hammer? So all this is happening in his head while he's walking to borrow the hammer. He's getting more and more upset. In his mind, he's playing these scenarios of this neighbor saying, no, you can't borrow my hammer. And he's like, why? Why can I not borrow your hammer? This is so rude. What kind of a neighbor are you? This is ridiculous. And then by the time he gets to his neighbor's door, he pounds on the door. The neighbor opens it and says, "Hi, neighbor." And the gentleman, who not 1 minute before was thinking, "I need to borrow a hammer, I bet my neighbor would let me," had gotten so upset that when the neighbor opened the door with his smiling face, he said, "Keep your hammer," and turned around and left. Now, I tell that story because I feel like I can relate. I myself have worked things up in my mind. I have told this story so many times, I know the outcome. I have approached the person in my mind. I have approached the situation in my mind. So by the time I actually ever invite the other person or situation into my mind, I've already come to the conclusion because I've been thinking about it. I've been dealing with it. And yet the other person, often, this is the first time they've heard any of this. The poor neighbor was like, "What are you even talking about? Keep my hammer? What? What does that even mean?" So when we have expectations, they will not get met. When we have expectations that we have not voiced, that we have not spoken, they will not get met. When we have expectations in our mind, in our hearts, and we say nothing, we no longer, you ready for this? Are allowed to be angry at someone for not filling the expectations that they knew nothing about. So, what if someone can't give you what you want or what you need? I challenge that a little bit. I challenge you, if that's what you're thinking, to ask for what you need. To tell this loved one or whoever it is what you want. Is it possible they won't be able to do it? Of course it is. They should also be given the opportunity to tell you. Now, I want to caution you because often we don't say anything, we don't say anything, we don't say anything, we don't say anything, and it builds in our mind. And we wind up where in the beginning it was, "May I borrow your hammer?" To keep your dang hammer. How's our delivery? If we've been ruminating over this, if we've been expecting this, let's say for 20 years of marriage, 365 times 20, what's that? 70,000 times we've been expecting something, maybe multiple times a day, maybe 700,000 times we've had an expectation in our mind and in our heart that we've never spoken. And now we're finally tired of waiting and we're going to just say it. Even though it's happened 700,000 times in your mind, the other person may only be hearing about it for the first time. Approach it with curiosity. Approach your sharing of what you need and what you want with curiosity, with kindness, with love. Think of a little child who wants a cookie. They say, "Can I have a cookie?" You say no. So 2 minutes later, "Can I have a cookie?" No, sometimes the child ends up throwing a temper tantrum, and I'm not saying to do that. What I am saying is the child continues to let us know what they want. And often, most of the time, it's not angry. This is what I want. This is what I need. And whether it's yes or no, for the most part, okay. So I challenge us all to be a little more mindful and thoughtful in our asking. I challenge us, myself included, not to get to the point where we're yelling to keep your dang hammer, but we ask for what we need and what we want when we need and want it in a way that is kind, in a way that you yourself would receive. If somebody asked it of you, how would you like to be asked? Oh man, that's a whole nother tangent, but a quick side note is the golden rule is treat others how you want to be treated. And I think the platinum rule is treat others how they would like to be treated. That's a whole nother podcast. But for now, say something in the way that is kind. Say it before it explodes out of your mouth. Say it before it spews angrily from you. Say it with kindness. Say it with love. Say what you need, what you want, in a loving and kind way. If I walked up to you right now on the street and I said, keep your hammer, you'd be defensive. You would be. If somebody came up to me on the street and yelled at me to keep my freaking hammer, I also would be defensive. Be like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know you. And I don't feel very loved. And yet if I'm walking on the street and I meet you and you say to me, do you happen to have a hammer I could borrow? I'm so much more open to listening to that and entertaining the idea than if you were to yell at me. Wouldn't you be more open to listening to someone if they approached you with kindness and with love and told you what was happening in their mind? Maybe not everything, maybe not TMI, maybe not all the thoughts in your mind, but ask and speak in a way that says what you need so that the other person can then also make a choice. Yes, I am able to do that. No, I'm not. And quite often, how about this? And then it leads to a conversation. I can give you this. Is this what you mean? Just recently, Wes and I were having a conversation. I asked him for something, which in my mind was incredibly clear. And he said, well, what do you mean? Something I've taught my children is that when someone asks you a question, it's because they don't know the answer. So my response was, what do you mean? What do I mean? I thought I was clear on what I asked. And he said, well, this is what I heard. And I thought, wow, that's not what I thought I said. So then I explained it again, and we were able to understand one another. And of course, obviously, we always do everything perfectly. No, we don't. We miscommunicate at times. It's human nature. And then we learn and we change. So often when I say I need help, perhaps what I meant was, I need somebody to do the dishes and fold the laundry. And maybe what he heard was, I need somebody to mow the lawn. When all I wanted was to get outside and mow the lawn while everybody else did the other stuff. If I'm not specific about what I need, I can't get upset. I shouldn't get upset when somebody doesn't understand what's going on in my mind. It's not fair to them. I don't expect them to be a mind reader, although yet we do, don't we? All the time. You know me well enough to know exactly what I'm thinking. No, we don't. We don't know each other well enough to know exactly what they're thinking. On the movies, they say, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And the response is just obviously yes. But if they were to both say the same thing at the same time, which I've seen in some movies too, they look at each other like, oh, I wasn't even kind of thinking that. So remember that and show each other grace. So thank you for walking with me. This is your first time, the Stronger Than You Think podcast. If it's your 20th time, 19th time, share this with someone if it's helped you at all. Send me a message asking me a question. What I do all day long for my work, for my own business, is I help people. Ask me a question. Let me help you and others through a podcast. Allow me to listen. Allow me to help so that you can thrive, so that you can soar, so that you can go from being stuck to soaring, frustrated to free, hopeless to happy, panicky to peaceful. You've got this. You're stronger than you think. Remember, I'm walking with you. Have the very best day. Love you. Bye.